I want to start with a story about a teenager. I've got two stories about teenagers. One was carried into exile as a teenager. So right there, you probably know who I'm talking about. But just try to put yourself into this position. Carried into exile, away from his family, good godly family, and taken to a foreign land with completely different language, completely different values. The name of this teenager was God is Judge. That was his name. God is Judge. But after being carried into this foreign land, his new name is Bel's Prince, and Bel was the god of this land. Bel's Prince. How would you like to be addressed as Bel's Prince, or what would be maybe Buddha's Prince, or something of that nature? Every time someone talks to you, they address you in the name of a god that you're against, that you don't believe in, that you want to teach people about the true God, but every time they say your name, it's the name of the wrong God, of the false God. And right away he's given a test, right? But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine that he drank. And that word purposed in his heart is what I'm going to be working towards in this talk. What was that? What was that Daniel purposed in his heart? Where did that come from, and why was that there? Why was he willing to risk his life? And just, if you put yourself into his position, like, no one's going to know if you bend the rules a little bit, and there's every reason that you would be forgiven for doing so. So fast forward 80 plus years. So we're talking about a teenager, and now I'm talking about an octogenarian. This is a person that's 80 plus years old. And he realizes where he is in the prophecies, where he is in Earth's history, and he realizes the prophecy is pertaining to him and his time. And it's the same person. And Daniel says, I turned my face to the Lord, seeking him by prayers and pleas for mercy and fasting and sackcloth and ashes. And I prayed to the Lord my God and made confession, saying, O Lord, great and awesome God, who keeps covenants and steadfast love to those who love him and keep his commandments, we have sinned and done wrong, and acted wickedly and rebelled, turning aside from your commandments and rules. Skipping down to later in this same prayer, O Lord, according to all your righteous acts, let your anger and your wrath turn away from your city, Jerusalem, your holy hill, for our sins, and for the iniquities of our fathers. Jerusalem, your people have become a byword among all those around us. Now therefore, our God, listen to the prayer of your servant and to the pleas for mercy. And for your own sake, O Lord, make your face to shine upon your sanctuary, which is desolate. O my God, incline your ear and hear, open your eyes and see our desolations, and the city that is called by your name. For we do not present our pleas before you because of our righteousness, but because of your great mercy. O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, pay attention and act. Do not delay. For your own sake, O my God, because your city and your people are called by your name. This is a person who has a deep relationship. You can see it. You can feel it in his words. He's not talking to a distant king, a Roman, or a Greek god or something. He's not talking to that. He is talking to someone that he knows. And so how did Daniel get to there? And what was the seed? And how did it grow? I want to talk about another story that's very similar, right? About a 17-year-old that took care of sheep and goats. This is a 17-year-old that was favored by his father. And you know who this is. Given a special coat, right? And he has a dream. And the dream indicates that all of his brothers are going to bow down to him. And his brother's like, what? Stop it. And he has another dream that his brothers and his father and mother are going to bow down to him. And his father, it says, what kind of a dream is that? And so his brothers are out tending the sheep, and Joseph gets sent, right? And you know what happens? They see him afar off, and they come up with a plan. Let's end this whole dream business and this spoiled, favored son. Let's throw him in. Let's kill him, they say first. And then they change their plan a little bit. Maybe we won't kill him. We'll throw him in a dry well. And when the traders from Egypt are coming by, they have an even better plan. They sell him. They get rid of him for good, and they lie to their father. And when Jacob saw that his son had been killed, torn to pieces by wild animals, he couldn't be consoled, right? He said, I'm going to mourn this until I die. And in the story of Joseph, you see so much brokenness. Who's broken? Joseph's broken. The brothers are broken. They have this guilt. The father is broken. Everyone's broken in the story. And Joseph is on his way to Egypt to be a slave. Likely lost, right? And what was it in Joseph that he held firm? What did he have? Why did he do that? Would he be forgiven if the story said, he was tempted and he fell? It's a very human thing. But instead he says to Potiphar's wife, and make no mistake, Joseph's life is at stake here. Slaves have no rights in whatever society they're in. They're slaves. They don't typically spend time in prison because why would you spend money to imprison a slave? His life's at stake, and he says to Potiphar's wife, with me in charge, my master doesn't concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he has entrusted to my care. No one greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except for you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against, and the word is, and sin against God? We had a prayer request today, unspoken, about the problems in someone's life. And I think this story speaks to that, right? We go through a lot of things in this life, a lot of problems. Can you imagine being sold by your brothers and being carried off as a slave and then being thrown into prison? What would he say to God? What would Joseph say to God? Lord, what's going on? Why? What kind of a plan is this? Maybe Joseph questions that he did something wrong and God is not on his side anymore. And we have the same thoughts, don't we? We go through things in this life and we're saying, this is not the plan. This is not what I had in mind. He was in jail for over 2 years. He had a chance. It looked like some hope of getting out because he had a dream and it came true, and then that's not his ticket out. Why would God put somebody in jail like that and let him sit for 2 years? Have you been in the same place for 2 years, stuck in a role or a job or a situation? We do, don't we? I don't think Joseph's story is all that unique. I think we, to maybe a less degree, sometimes to more degree, we go through these things where we just don't see how this is the plan. Interpreting Pharaoh's dream, Joseph says, "It is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace." So the relationship that Joseph had with God strengthened. It didn't diminish, it strengthened, it got deeper. Later, speaking to his brothers, Joseph says these words, "So then it was not you who sent me here, but God." And that indicates a deep relationship to say those words to the very people that enslaved you, that sold you away, to say that it wasn't you but God. I don't think those words came to mind for many, many, many years, right? I doubt that that was the attitude at first. And so what does that mean? That it took a lot of time for God to bring Joseph to that relationship, to that point. And that time that we're talking about those were not good times. But they had a purpose, didn't they? Nothing that Satan can put you through, God cannot use for good. He's amazing that way. David indicates his relationship. He said to the Philistine, "You come at me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." Why did David say that? Because David had already been through other things, right? He had already seen that God was his strength, and that the various weapons that your hand holds is not your strength, it is God. David is a good example of relationships, I think. It's hard to find someone with a deeper relationship in the Bible than what David indicates in his words. He says in 2 Samuel 22, 2 and 3, "The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation. He is my stronghold, my refuge, and my Savior. From violent men you save me." If you're like me, and sometimes you wonder, what should I pray for today? I don't know what to say to God. I don't know if you've felt that way. I don't know what to say to God. What can I say that God doesn't already know? What should I say in my prayer? I don't want to have just a rote, say the same thing every day. I want to say something meaningful to the King of the universe, but I don't know what to say. And I want you to bookmark in your Bible Psalms 119. If you're looking for things to say, if you're looking for ideas, for feelings that can be expressed to God, Psalms 119. And this is just a sampling. "With all my heart I have sought you. Do not lead me astray from your commandments." He says, "I have hidden your word in my heart that I might not sin against you." He says, "I will meditate on your precepts and regard your ways." And I think that's an interesting one. Meditate on your precepts and regard your ways. What does that mean exactly? That you would take some quiet time and you would think about something longer before letting your thoughts move on. You take a nugget, something from the Bible, and just really think about that for a while. He says, "I am a stranger on the earth. Do not hide your commandments from me." David wrote, "Your testimonies are indeed my delight. They are my counselors. Turn my eyes away from worthless things. Revive me with your word." And he says, "It was good for me to be afflicted, that I might learn your statutes." He said, "Turn my eyes away from worthless things." And I think that's a special message for us. And it's a God thing that some of what I'll be talking about today we'll be learning more about with the media mind presentation. Definitely. Turn my eyes. David said this. He had no smartphone. He said, "Turn my eyes away from worthless things." And what comes after that? "Revive me in your word." Those two go together. He said, "It was good for me to be afflicted that I might learn your statutes." And that's why I wanted to remind you of the stories of these two men in the Bible with relationships with God, Joseph and Daniel. They went through such a hardship to get there. Christopher read Enoch. Enoch studied with God. Does it say that? Enoch studies good. Enoch healed lots of people and did lots of things. In the very little bit that we learn about Enoch, he used the word walked, and I really love that word because when it comes to a relationship, it's not instantaneous. My relationship with my wife, it began when we met, and it has been a walk. It's not instantaneous. It's not too fast. It's not too slow. It's just right. We grow together. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. So we should let our expectations be that. What's our relationship? How is it going to grow with God? It's going to be a walk, but we're going to get there. And this walk is going to be a beautiful walk. Another person, very quickly, as just one more example of a person that God sent to be through some hardship, was Moses, a prince, sent to be a shepherd for how long? 4 years? 4 years would be a long time. That's from high school freshman to a high school senior. When you're in high school, that's a long time, 4 years. No, Moses was a shepherd for 40 years. And he came out with a deep relationship with God. And so maybe you are in the prince stage of your life and things are going well. Maybe you are in the 40 years stage, and maybe you're in the stage where God is using you to do great things. Or maybe those are all mixed and matched up, but don't be discouraged. Moses expressed his feelings with God like no other, right? It was Moses that asked God to turn his wrath away from the Israelites. God would say, well, what about this? And it almost seems, that doesn't come to my mind to counter argue with God. But Moses had a closer relationship with God, and he had a closeness where he could say to God what was on his heart. He would say it. And did God just say, you be quiet now, right? Or no. God entertained a conversation with Moses. If you're struggling with something hard and you're upset, and we find this in David's writings, it does not lessen God's love for you if you bring something hard to him and you say, I'm upset about this. Moses said, now I pray, if I've found favor in your sight, show me now thy ways, that I may know you, to the end that I might find favor in thy sight, and consider that this nation is thy people. And God said, my presence shall go with you, and I will give you rest. And Moses said to him, if my presence go not with me, carry us up from hence. For wherein now shall it be known that I have found favor in thy sight, and thy people? Is it not in that thou goest with us, so that we are separated, I and thy people, from all the people that are on the face of the earth? And Jehovah said to Moses, I will do this thing also that thou hast spoken, for thou hast found favor in my sight, and I know thee by name. And he said, show me, I pray thee, thy glory. Which is a very bold request. And he said, I will make all my goodness pass before thee, and will proclaim the name of Jehovah before thee. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. And he said, you can't see my face, For man cannot see me and live. And Jehovah said, Behold, there is a place by me, and thou shalt stand upon the rock, and it shall come to pass, while my glory passes by, that I will put thee in the cleft of the rock, and will cover you with my hand until I have passed by, and I will take away my hand, and you will see my back, but my face shall not be seen. This conversation that we read, I mean, it's just so interesting, isn't it? But it's a conversation between two people that know each other. No, it's not two people. It's a conversation between God and his servant, God and man. But it's not the conversation I would expect between God and man. I think naturally I expect the Greek thing with Zeus, right? And the God is like got some thunderbolts and some, and I'm up here in this conversation. This is a conversation between two people that love each other. I shouldn't say two people, but a being and a lowly human. And that human is lifted so high as to have a conversation with the Creator. The same Creator that created the sun, this burning ball of gas in the sky, many, many times bigger than the whole earth. He created that with a word, and he's still willing to have a little conversation with us. We're so small, and yet we have such we're so highly esteemed, aren't we, that we could even do that. And finally, the ultimate example of this relationship is Jesus, right? And just a couple snippets from the Gospels. But it was his custom to go to the synagogue. So to come together and do what we're doing right now, to meet with like believers, share our experiences and encourage one another. It was his habit to be thankful, right? We see that in the loaves and fishes, and he looks up to God, Father, and thanks him. He talked about obedience. Those who obey my commandments are the ones who love me, and because they love me, my Father will love them, and I will love them, and I will reveal myself to each one of them. And finally, obedience in the sense of to his Father's will and to the plan of salvation itself. And he said these words which have so much emotion, so much depth. When Jesus said, Father, if it is not your will, take this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And everything hangs on that. But it's also an example for us. Even if we can't see it, we can't see the plan, and we can't see through the other side, we know that God has got us. How do we develop a relationship like that? A deeper relationship with God? So, I think the answer for us in 2019 is in the parable of the sower. We live in a special time and a special place. It's quite a bit different than any other time and place in the Earth's history, maybe for quite a long time, to where we have an entire encyclopedia of information, in our pocket. It's a strange thing. And the parable of the sower talks about the sower throws the seeds in different places, but the one that pertains most to us is the thorns, I think. And the seed that fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew, and they choked it. They choked the word. And then later the disciples asked Jesus, what does that all mean? And when he explained the thorns, he said, but the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desire for other things come and choke the word, making it unfruitful. And what are the worries of this life? What things do you worry about? We talked about this in our Sabbath school lesson, didn't we? A 2019 study found that more Americans than ever are stressed, particularly about physical, family, and workplace wellness. They're less rested. Americans are less rested since they began measuring these things. and spending less time with family and friends. 4 out of 5 Americans report feeling stressed, and 15% feel that stress is unmanageable. So the people you interact with, and maybe you, and I mean the stress, our society has more stress and not less. Even though we're a prosperous nation with many, many, many freedoms, our economy is better than it has been if you plot it over time, and we have more comforts, more luxuries, but Americans are stressed more than they were. The worries of this life. We talked a little bit in Sabbath school about decision fatigue. It was talking about what was the other fatigue? It was the compassion fatigue, and I looked at a little bit of this thing called decision fatigue, which is if you make so many choices in a day, lots and lots and lots and lots of choices, whether they be big or little, and you make lots and lots of little choices, that it takes its toll. It's almost, you can think of it, or they think of it like a bank account, and towards the end of the day, you just don't want to make any more decisions at all. And so they do these studies where they have some people that are making lots and lots of choices, and then they do a willpower test. And some people that don't make a bunch of choices, and they take the same willpower test, and your willpower is less if you are forced to make lots and lots of choices all day. And then they say, well, let's look at some of the records of the one test was where is that? Of a parole judge. Do they grant parole more in the morning or in the afternoon? And they grant parole more in the morning. They're willing to consider both sides and think about all of it and make a complicated decision. Towards the end of the day, their brain is just so worn out of making all these decisions that they just say, no, go back to jail, go back to jail, go back to jail. And doctors are more likely, when you look at the data, they're more likely to order a different test for some to look into more of a condition in the morning. In the afternoon, they're more likely to just say. And so the society and the lives that we live do we have more decisions than people, say, in the 1950s, or less? I think we have so many little decisions that we're always making, right? We're constantly bombarded with information and things, and the pace is faster. What is the deceitfulness of wealth? For us, what is the deceitfulness of wealth? Wealth tells people, I am rich and I've acquired wealth and I don't need a thing. But you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. But there's a flip side to that, which is that we're bombarded with the message in America that we need to buy things. Constantly, that's part of the thing that we're presented constantly. If you buy this thing, you will be happier. Every commercial, every advertisement has the same, there's only like 5 categories of reasons but they use them all. If you buy this thing, you'll be happier. You need this thing. And we're constantly given that message, like from birth. But this is a strange thing about wealth, the deceitfulness of wealth. If you look up online, the median household income in white salmon, you can look this up online. It's $47,000, $418,000 a year is the median income for the city of white salmon. And then if you look at another website and you type that in, and it will tell you that with that income, you are in the top 0.36% of the world with that income. You are not in the top 1% of the world. You're in the top 0.3% of the world. But I would say if I asked somebody that was making $47,000 if they were rich, they would say, no, I'm not rich. It depends on who you compare yourself to. In 1 hour, you make $24.70. But in 1 hour, the average laborer in Zimbabwe makes 53 cents. And so this deceitfulness of wealth, I think it has a couple applications for us. There's a deceitfulness of wealth. And we worry about things we shouldn't worry about, and we are, we're just bombarded with all this stuff, all this stuff. And the Bible calls this stuff thorns. Materialism is a lie. And then third thing about the thorns is the desires for other things, which I like that Jesus didn't spell that out. I think desires for other things, it's unique to you. You have certain desires for other things that are not the same as the person sitting next to you. The desires for other things. He didn't say what those were, but I think we all know. I want to tell you a little story about Fudge. He's not here, so I guess I can tell a story. When he was downstairs helping teach the youth class, he told us a story of when he and Paula met. He was into racing cars. He had this fast car, and he won, and he gave her the trophy. And that was their first date, or some very close to their first date. But the reason he was telling the youth this story was he came to the conclusion that, racing cars is not necessarily an evil thing or whatever. It could be a pastime that you could do, but for him, it was coming between him, and it was distracting him from his relationship with God. It was getting too big, and it was getting more. The desires for other things. They're not all evil things, are they? It's just desires for other things. And the Bible calls those weeds and thorns that come up and choke. A couple more things. Of course, I have to talk, when we're talking about a relationship with God, if you want to have a relationship with God that's deeper like Joseph or Moses or David or Enoch, you have to think about your time. So some more numbers. I like numbers, right? If we live to be 80, if I live to be 80, so starting at my age right now, 44, live to be 80, then I have about 13,000 days left in my life. And that's about 1.1 billion seconds. So if you're younger than me and you plan on living past 80, then you are a multi-billionaire in time. You have more than 1 billion seconds to spend. If you're older than me, maybe you're only a multi-millionaire in time, but you're still so much wealth of time that you've been given. How many of your millions or billions can you spare for your relationship with God? Are you willing to spare some of your billions? What would you say to Bill Gates if he haggled over the price of a sandwich? He's a multi-billionaire. Yet we haggle with God over a few seconds here and there. It's the same thing. You're extremely wealthy in time. Of your billions of seconds, you won't, spend a few. Don't be greedy. Can you take the gift, which is the Sabbath, that's been given to you, and spend it a little bit on what it was intended for? Finally, I want to wrap up with my personal, things that have worked for me to get closer to God. I think it's different for every person, but morning prayer, whether I feel like it or not, thanking Him, and of course expressing concerns, but starting out with the thankfulness, think of things, because I don't immediately think of the things that God has given me. It doesn't always come to my mind right at first, but if you give a little bit of time, there's plenty to be thankful for. And one thing I've been doing recently is just read a smaller portion of the Bible, well, not a bigger portion of the Bible, but to shrink it down to, I'll read a few verses and I'll stop on one that's, I don't know, interesting to me, or it just whatever I find like, wow. And then I will try to think about that one principle or that one verse throughout the day. So to recall it during the day. So I get into this trap where I have a morning worship and then I can just somehow I can completely forget about it the rest of the day. And even later I'll be like, well, I didn't act according to that thing. I read this thing in the morning. God showed me this, and then I did that. And how did I forget? So I think to bring it up deliberately. You read something in the morning, and try to deliberately bring it up in your mind and recall it. Try to apply it, that very thing. And maybe spend a couple days on the same verse. I'm learning that it's not a race, it's a walk. And finally, keep a song in your heart. So with that, I will let us have our closing hymn.